are joined by Harvard Law Professor Emeritus and best-selling author Alan Dershowitz. He's got a new book out, released just yesterday, The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. Go get your copy. Read it on the beach. You'll impress everybody who sees you with how smart you are. Professor Dershowitz, good to have you on.
Hey, it's great to be on. It's a very topical book because it deals with all the preventive mechanisms that we use to try to stop crimes from occurring, like deportation. It also deals with mega issues.
I was going to jump right into that. Tell us about the deportation piece and how you think the administration's doing on the legal front there.
Well, deportation is one of the oldest forms of prevention known to humankind. It used to be called exile. If we were afraid of somebody, we would exile them and make them leave the country. And so we're using that now as a mechanism of prevention. And I would say that I would give a split verdict to the administration. They're doing the right thing substantively. That is, they're trying to throw the right people out. They're trying to make sure that we're not subject to crime by gang members. On the other hand, they're not doing such a great job on due process. And the Supreme Court has basically come down with split decisions. They basically said, look, the president has the authority to decide who's in the country and who's not in the country, but he has to cross every constitutional T and dot every constitutional I. And so the courts have struck back on some of the mechanisms that are being used, but they've said it's okay to use deportation as a method of crime prevention.
Talking to Alan Dershowitz, you and I have trod a similar path where I voted Democrat, and then Democrats I started to see losing their mind, and I have changed how I voted. I'm curious for you. You've had a longer career in the law than I have by far, and a much more successful one. But I'm also a lawyer. When did, in your mind, it go from a quote unquote traditionally liberal perspective to stand, for instance, for First Amendment free speech, for basic principles of fairness, and turn into more of a conservative one? Do you remember a point in time when you looked around and said, boy, the ACLU isn't the ACLU that I grew up supporting?
Well, I was on the national board. I was the youngest person on the national board of the ACLU. I spent years supporting the ACLU. I worked with the ACLU to defend the rights of Nazis to march in Skokie, Illinois. I defended people on death row as an ACLU lawyer. I won't give a nickel to the ACLU, and I call the ACLU the Anti-Civil Liberties Union. They have become completely partisan and political. Once every 2 years, they represent a Nazi in order to show that they're still civil libertarians. But the vast, vast, vast majority of their work is on progressive, woke, left-wing causes. And, they've become kind of the leader in the weaponization of the legal system against Donald Trump, against Republicans, against conservatives, against Christians. And so I'm totally contemptuous. It's interesting. I've devoted my whole life to human rights, civil liberties, and civil rights. I now see something that's marked civil liberties, civil rights, human rights. I throw it in the garbage pail because I know it's going to be on the wrong side of everything. Today, human rights is just turned against Israel, against the United States, against Christianity, against decency. And so I have no support for those concepts anymore. They've been hijacked. They've been taken away. And I'm still a civil libertarian. And, I describe myself as a constitutional libertarian, but as well as a meritocratic egalitarian and a constructive contrarian. So I haven't changed, but like Ronald Reagan said, the Democrats have left me. I left the Democratic Party hours after the Democratic Convention this year when I saw that they were picking one after the other progressive, anti-liberal speakers, anti-Israel speakers, sometimes anti-Semitic speakers, and the Republicans were doing a better job at preserving liberty and democracy and freedom of speech. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent, but I'm not a Democrat.
How'd you vote?
I can't say because I love sleeping with my wife, and she has sworn me to secrecy. I can tell you this: I voted for Biden and I voted for Hillary Clinton, but I'm not going to disclose how I voted in the last in the last election, or how I would vote in the next election. But I have been supportive of many of the things that Trump has done, just as I was supportive of many of the things that previous presidents have done, while at the same time being critical of many of the things. And deportation is one of the things I'm concerned about. I'm also concerned that Donald Trump may abandon Israel. That's been a concern for me. And is he going to allow Israel to protect itself against a potential nuclear Iran? I don't know the answer to that question. In my book, The Preventive State, I spent a lot of time on the Iran issue because that's the personification of a preventive attack. I use the example of Nazi Germany in 1935 when Britain and France could have destroyed Nazi Germany before it was capable of destroying all of Europe and killing 50 million people. And they didn't do it because they didn't take Hitler seriously. And, peace in our time, Chamberlain, and that enabled Hitler to kill 50 million people. Had they attacked, they would have, killed 15,000 people or 20,000 people, and they would have defeated Nazi Germany. But, history is blind to the future, and we just don't know. At that time, we didn't know what we were stopping. And so I spend time in my book on that as well.
The Preventive State, the challenge of preventing serious harms while preserving essential liberties. Professor Dershowitz's book just came out yesterday. And Professor Dershowitz, if I could draw upon your time as a criminal defense attorney, I know you're not on this case. That would be interesting. You're not on this case, but I'm sure you've been following it and seeing in the headlines. What is your just overall sense as to the likely outcome, to the degree you can see it this early on in the case, or perhaps the pitfalls for either the defense or the prosecution in the Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. P. Diddy, sex trafficking case that's getting a lot of attention in headlines, given how high profile Mr. Combs is?
If I had to make a prediction, I would predict that he'd get convicted and that his conviction would be reversed on appeal. I don't understand how a jury should be able to see that horrible video of him kicking and beating up his girlfriend in the hallway of the hotel. That's not what he's charged with. He's charged with running, a RICO enterprise. And that tape is so darn prejudicial, you can't get it out of your head. As soon as you see that tape, you say to yourself, I want to convict the son of a bitch. And so I think it will be reversed on appeal. But it's very hard to believe that a jury won't find his conduct unacceptable.
Well, why do you think, Professor Dershowitz, Selena? So clearly, you're right. I mean, the guy's a bad guy. I mean, everyone. There's no right. He's not on trial for being a good guy or a bad guy. He's a bad guy. Right. That's very clear. And I think even the defense isn't really contesting that. But as a matter of law, why would you? How would you see it? Perhaps. And again, I know we're asking you to sort of see into the future, which is tough. But how would you see it being overturned if, let's say, the jury does what you think? Why would you think then that it might be overturned on appeal?
For the same reason that the Harvey Weinstein New York conviction was overturned, and that is the admissibility of prejudicial material that swayed the jury to convict, even though the elements of the crime and the elements of RICO are very tough to establish, and the elements of conducting a sex trafficking business. So that would be the grounds for reversal, that evidence came in that should never have been seen by the jury.
All right, let me go back to your experience and your staying committed to principle ACLU and everything else. We talked earlier on this program as suddenly Jake Tapper writes a book and says, boy, we could have never known that Joe Biden wasn't mentally or physically competent for the job. And the New York Times and the Washington Post write editorials saying, boy, somebody really should have said something about the state that Biden was in. And, the media ostensibly does exist to speak truth to power. They wrote democracy dies in darkness at the top of the Washington Post. You are steeped in liberal circles where you hang out, where you live. What are people who read the New York Times and watch MSNBC, what are they saying in conversations that you hear? Do they feel as if they have been lied to, or are they so convinced that Trump is Hitler that they don't even care if they're being lied to because it's a price worth paying. What do you hear?
It's the latter. In private, they're praising people who lied, and they wish the lie had been successful and that Biden would have been allowed to run, because many of them think that Biden would have snuck past the finish line because he's more likable than Kamala Harris. I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm not a pollster, but I can only tell you that people on the on that side, the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC side, they don't care about lying. They would have been very happy if there had been a complete and total and successful cover-up in order to defeat Trump, and then Biden would be president for a couple of months, and then he'd have to leave office, either through the 25th Amendment or by resignation, and then we'd have Kamala Harris as president. That's what the Martha's Vineyard crowd is objecting to, not that they were denied the truth, but that they didn't do a good enough job in covering up the truth.
Let me ask you this, too. Given that I think anybody who's a rational, reasonable person would acknowledge that Biden was not mentally or physically capable of being president of the United States, do you, as a lawyer, believe there is any value in challenging some of the decisions made by Biden? For instance, this big expansive pardons that he gave at the end of his tenure, based on his mind not being capable of entering into the decisions that were being made? Is there any legal ground there in your mind to challenge these things?
I don't think so, because then you'd have to challenge probably some of the things done at the end of the Reagan presidency, maybe the Roosevelt presidency, certainly the Woodrow Wilson presidency. If in fact Biden didn't know that things were being signed for him by the use of the auto pen, that might pose an interesting challenge. It would have to be something that was constitutionally required to be signed, like a law. Pardons, for example, don't have to be signed. You can just give an oral pardon. But for a law to be valid, it has to be either signed or vetoed by the president. And if it could be demonstrated that Biden didn't really know and that he had authorized somebody else to do the signing, that could raise problems. In some respects, all of this goes back to prevention, because what is the 25th Amendment all about? It's all about trying to prevent a non-qualified president from having access to the nuclear trigger. And, we do so many things preventively in order to assure that greater dangers don't exist. And we have to make sure that when we do it according to due process. And that's the crisis we're in now. We're not in a constitutional crisis. We're in a political crisis and a constitutional conflict. And the Constitution has so far figured out ways of resolving these issues. And so I'm not worried. As long as President Trump says and really does not in any way violate a Supreme Court order, then we're not in a crisis.
Last question for you quickly here, because we got to get
Sure.
to a break. But you talked about your experience with Trump and being of the opinion that he's better on Israel issues than certainly Democrats have been, based on the platform they put forward in the DNC. Two-parter. Do you hear a lot of Jewish people out there acknowledging that Trump has been very good on Israel? And the second part of that, do people say, hey, you can criticize him for a lot, but the idea that he's Hitler is absolutely insane? I'm talking Jewish voters in particular.
No, I wish there were more sensible Jewish voters, but there are a lot of Jewish voters who don't believe he's supportive of Israel, who can't find. These are people who are afflicted with Trump derangement syndrome. Some of them also have Bibi derangement syndrome. And neither Netanyahu nor Trump can do anything right. And so if he's supportive of Israel, it must be for in an effort to get a plane from Qatar. If he's against people on campus who are anti-Semites or anti-Israel, it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It has to do with he doesn't like universities. Unless you are in some of these radical, progressive, woke, left-wing circles, it is impossible to understand the depths. I mean, they think it's an insult to Hitler to say that Trump's Hitler. They think he's worse. These people just have no limit to what. And by the way, I know people in Israel have the same attitude toward Netanyahu. They cannot be rational about those subjects, and it's too bad because in both cases, Netanyahu and Trump have done many good things, and they've done some things that are subject to criticism, and people should have a nuanced view, but they don't.
Alan Dershowitz, appreciate the time, sir. Book is
Always
out, The Preventative State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. We appreciate the time, sir.
Thank you so much. Be well.
If you live in a house, you know it already, your roof can collect a lot of rain. In fact, it was raining so hard yesterday, I told the crew, I was like, I may get knocked off air because the storms are coming through with such severity while we're on air, and that can happen April, May, June in particular, all over the area that I live, and your gutters can get clogged in a big way, not only with limbs, not only with leaves, wiffle balls, footballs. My kids are in the backyard playing all the time, and I got to tell you, everything ends up in the gutter. And if you've got kids or grandkids, you probably have experienced that as well. Right now, you can save up to 30% off at leaffilter.com/clayandbuck. You can make sure that your gutter clogs don't have to become a reality. This is America's #1 gutter protection system. Schedule your free inspection up to 30% off your entire purchase at leaffilter.com/clayandbuck. That's LEAF filter.com/clayandbuck. See the representative for warranty details.